Just as I stepped into the room, I saw Jack. But what happened next left me completely shocked. His eyes were filled with anger as he marched straight toward me. Before I could understand what was happening, he grabbed my hair and started dragging me across the floor. My heart was pounding, and every second felt like the ground was slipping away. Then, with one harsh shove, he pushed me out of the hotel door. Everything went black. My name is Helen. My first job after college was as an assistant at Smith & Jacobs law firm in Hartford. It was always busy there, phones ringing nonstop. I loved the fast-paced environment. It kept me on my toes while I was still learning. That's when I met Jack. He worked in the purchasing department, which was close to the legal offices. One day, I noticed him arguing on the phone about a delayed shipment. After hanging up, he caught me watching and said, "Suppliers," rolling his eyes. "Rough day?" I asked with a smile. "Every day's a battlefield here," he replied. "You're new, huh?" "Yeah, I just started this week." "I'm Helen."
Jack.
"Welcome to the madness. Don't let the chaos scare you off." Soon, we started having lunch together. Navigating the big cafeteria was easier with someone who knew the place. Jack was easy to talk to, had a quick sense of humor, and wasn't afraid to share his opinions. One lunch turned into many, and before long, we were grabbing drinks after work. Our conversations shifted from work to more personal topics. Jack told me he was an only child, adored by his mother but constantly criticized for not living up to her expectations. "You haven't met my mom yet," Jack said one evening, "but brace yourself when you do. She has this image of the perfect woman, and trust me, no one is ever good enough." After a while, our friendship turned into something more. A year later, Jack proposed. We had a small wedding, just the way we wanted, and bought an apartment together with the help of my grandmother's savings. Life with Jack was mostly good. We had our share of small arguments, things like forgetting to buy milk or whose turn it was to clean. Nothing serious, just normal couple stuff. Then, everything changed. I was constantly exhausted, and the smell of coffee, something I loved, made me feel sick. One morning, barely able to get out of bed, I decided enough was enough. I booked a doctor's appointment, thinking I might have the flu. Sitting in the waiting room, flipping through a magazine without actually reading it, I finally heard my name called. Dr. Scott, always straight to the point, asked me some questions, ran a few tests, and then said, "Well, Helen, congratulations are in order. You're pregnant." "Pregnant?" I repeated, stunned. I repeated the words, feeling shocked. "Are you sure?" "Quite sure," Dr. Scott said with a kind smile, handing me the test results. "But you need to be careful. Your body is showing some warning signs. Nothing too serious, but you need rest and less stress." I nodded, though my mind was racing. Pregnant. How would Jack take the news? I couldn't tell him over the phone. This was something we needed to talk about face to face. When I got home that evening, I found Jack sitting on the couch, focused on his phone. My hands felt shaky as I said, "Jack, we need to talk." He looked up at me. "What's wrong?" "I went to the doctor today," I began. "We're going to have a baby." Jack's face changed, but it wasn't the happy reaction I had hoped for. "A baby, Helen? This isn't great timing. We haven't even traveled yet, like we planned. And a baby is such a huge change." A pain hit my chest. "I know it's unexpected," I said softly. "But isn't it also kind of amazing? We're going to be parents." Jack ran his hands through his hair, something he always did when he was stressed. "I don't know, Helen. It's too much. Too soon." "Too soon for family with me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "No, that's not what I mean," he said quickly. "I just thought we'd have more time. More time for just us." The conversation went around in circles. Jack kept saying the timing was wrong, and I kept trying to focus on the positives. By the end of it, Jack shut down completely, leaving me feeling more alone than ever. What should have been a joyful moment was driving us apart. The next day at work, I went to see my boss, Mr. Bryan. I needed to make changes, as per the doctor's advice. "Mr. Bryan," I said nervously, "I need to ask for something. I'm pregnant, and there are some complications. Could I work from home for a while?" Mr. Bryan, always more understanding than I gave him credit for, didn't even hesitate. Of course, Helen. We'll set up whatever you need. Take care of yourself and that little one. Hearing his support gave me a little hope. But when I told Jack about the work-from-home arrangement that evening, his reaction was cold. So, you're just going to be home all the time now? He asked. I thought you'd be happy, I said, trying to stay calm. This will help me keep the stress down. Helen, you're not listening. Jack snapped. I told you. It's too soon for all of this. I went to bed early that night, feeling the distance between us grow even wider. As I lay there in the dark, the reality of my situation hit me. This journey wasn't going to be easy. Every day, the air in our apartment felt heavier, like an invisible cloud hung over us. Even when the sun was shining outside, it didn't lift the weight. Jack seemed to drift further away, his affection fading fast. Little changes I made for the pregnancy irritated him, and he started saying he felt neglected, like my health and the baby's needs had pushed him aside. His mother, Mrs. Joyce, wasn't any better. One afternoon, she called, her voice icy cold. Helen, this child is not the right time. You should be focusing on supporting Jack, not dragging him into fatherhood, she said. I gripped the phone tighter, trying not to cry. It's not like I planned this on my own, Mrs. Joyce. This is our child, not just mine. There are options, you know, she replied sharply. You're choosing the most selfish one. Her words cut deep. As if that wasn't hard enough, Jack's behavior kept changing. His usual cologne was sometimes masked by another scent, a sweet perfume I didn't recognize. The first time I noticed it, I convinced myself it must have been from the dry cleaner. But then it happened again. And again. He started staying out late, muttering about catching up on work. Weekends, once our time together, were suddenly filled with business trips. I tried to push the doubts away, but it was becoming impossible to ignore. One Thursday, when Jack mentioned yet another trip, I made a decision. I reached out to Kenneth, an old classmate who is now a detective. We met at a quiet cafe, somewhere we wouldn't be overheard. Kenneth slid a folder across the table. I got what you asked for, Helen. Are you sure you want to see this? I nodded, unable to speak, and opened the folder. The photos were clear. There was Jack, with another woman. I recognized her immediately. She was a new hire at his office, someone he had mentioned in passing. I'm sorry, Helen, Kenneth said softly. There's video, too. It all adds up. My heart felt like it had dropped to my feet. Thanks, Kenneth. I needed to know, I whispered. I went home feeling numb, holding the folder as if it weighed a ton. When I unlocked the door, it swung open, and there stood Mrs. Joyce. Her face was tight with disapproval. I came to check on you, she said. Jack told me he's worried about you. I know about Jack, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. He's not on a business trip. He's with someone else. Mrs. Joyce scoffed, her response quick and cutting. You're driving him away. Always sick, always complaining, always needing something. What man wants that? That's no excuse for cheating, I said, my voice shaking with anger. I shot back, anger rising. And, do you think saying that will fix anything? Having his baby isn't about fixing things. How can you say no one in the family wants this child? This is our baby, not just mine. Her words hit me like a punch. Only you want this child, Helen. No one else, she said coldly. Get out, I said, my voice trembling. She threw her hands up and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was crushing. I sat on the couch, feeling hollow and numb. Every second dragged on, the pain in my chest matching the heaviness in my heart. But as I sat there, a decision settled over me. I had to face Jack and see the truth with my own eyes. Kenneth had already given me all the details I needed. The Grand View Hotel, room 786. His voice had been calm, but heavy with reluctance. My hands shook as I parked the car and walked into the hotel lobby. My stomach twisted into knots. I stepped into the elevator, my heart pounding louder with each passing floor. When the doors opened, the brightly lit hallway felt wrong, too cheerful for what I was about to face. Room 786 was just ahead. As I got closer, I heard laughter and the sound of glasses clinking. My hand trembled as I knocked. "Room service must be here with the champagne," a woman's carefree voice called out from inside. The seconds stretched endlessly before the door finally opened. Jack stood there, his face shifting from excitement to shock in an instant. "Helen? What? How did you find me?" "I know everything, Jack," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Before he could respond, I pushed past him and stepped into the room. The sight in front of me hit like a slap. There she was, his mistress, half-dressed and scrambling to cover herself as if modesty still mattered. Jack snapped out of his shock, and his face hardened. "Why are you here, Helen? To spy on me? To beg?" "No, Jack," I replied, forcing my voice to stay calm. "I'm here to see the truth." "The truth?" he scoffed, stepping closer.
"Fine.
"Here it is. I'm not happy with you anymore. You're always so focused on yourself and this baby. You don't even think about me." His mistress, now somewhat dressed, smirked and added, "Maybe if you paid more attention to him, he wouldn't be with me." Her words cut deep, but it was Jack's nod in agreement that twisted the knife. "Yeah," he said coldly. "You should thank us. Once the baby's born, I'll finally be able to move on properly." The room spun around me. A sharp pain shot through my abdomen, so sudden and intense that I clutched my stomach, gasping. Everything else blurred as the reality of his betrayal hit me harder than I ever thought possible. I doubled over, gasping as shock and pain swirled through me, making it hard to breathe. "Jack, I think something's wrong," I whispered, desperate. "Please call an ambulance." Jack and his mistress exchanged a quick, dismissive glance. Then he shrugged. "You're probably just overreacting like always," he said coldly. They dressed quickly, stepping over me like I was just a piece of furniture in their way. The last thing I saw before the darkness took over was the door closing behind them. The sharp click of the lock echoed in the empty room. When I woke up, a maid's voice pulled me from the darkness. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" she asked, her face blurry as I blinked to clear my vision. The pain was still there, a dull ache that spread through my whole body. Where am I?" I asked, my voice hoarse and strange even to me. "You're still in the hotel room, dear. I found you on the floor. Don't worry, I'm calling an ambulance," she said gently. True to her word, moments later, I was being wheeled into the emergency room. The hospital's bright lights were harsh, and the air was filled with the chaotic hum of doctors and nurses rushing around me. Their voices blended together into a confusing noise, but all I could think about was Jack, his betrayal, his indifference, his absence. He never showed up at the hospital. Neither did his mother. Every call I made went unanswered. Their silence cut deeper than any wound. When the doctor finally came with the news, his words crushed what little strength I had left. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "You've lost the baby." The grief hit me like a wave, heavy and suffocating. It was unbearable. The loss wasn't just mine. It felt like a cruel injustice, one that Jack, his mistress, and his mother had all contributed to. They had abandoned me when I needed them most. Bitterness and anger churned inside me, growing stronger with each passing moment. After what felt like an eternity, the hospital discharged me. I drove straight to our apartment, my chest heavy with pain and fury. Once inside, I grabbed Jack's things, his shirts, his socks, every trace of him, and started packing. Each item I touched felt like cutting another tie to the life I had shared with him. When I was done, I loaded everything into my car. I drove to Mrs. Joyce's house, my mind set. I didn't knock. I didn't care. I unloaded Jack's belongings right there in the driveway, letting them fall wherever they landed. Then I walked straight into her living room. Mrs. Joyce was sitting on the couch, her face blank, but her eyes told me she already knew why I was there. "Helen," she started, her tone tired. "You should just leave. Take what little dignity you have left." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and cold. "Dignity? You're the last person to talk to me about dignity." I took a step closer, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. You raised a man who abandoned his wife and his child. You stood by and let this happen. Don't lecture me about dignity. You don't even know what it means. I stand by him, and he'll be better off without you, she said bluntly. Her words felt like a slap, but something inside me snapped. Do you even care that your grandchild is gone? That your son left me alone in a hotel room while I lost his child? Her eyes flickered, refusing to meet mine. It's a tough situation. It's done, Helen. I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. How do you feel as a mother knowing what happened? Knowing you stood by while your grandchild was lost? She didn't answer, just looked away, her composed mask cracking ever so slightly. I will see your son in court, I said firmly. You can tell him that. Without waiting for a reply, I turned and walked out, leaving her sitting there, alone with the weight of her choices. As I reached my car, the cool air hit my face, sharp and refreshing. My path had never been clearer. I would fight, not just for myself, but for the life that was lost and for the truth that needed to be told. Stepping into the courthouse, I could feel the weight of what was about to happen. Maybe it wasn't the eyes on me, but the significance of the moment pressing down. My best friend from college, Sophia, stood beside me. She had become a top lawyer, known for her sharp skills and fearless demeanor. When I told Sophia everything, she didn't hesitate. I've got this, Helen. And don't worry about the fees. This one's on me, she said, her voice fierce and reassuring. We sat at our table, everything neatly arranged, evidence, documents, every piece of truth I had. Across the room, Jack and his mistress looked smug, their confidence radiating arrogance that churned my stomach. The proceedings began, and their lawyer immediately went on the attack. He painted me as a woman broken by grief, grasping at straws and making up wild stories. The plaintiff has suffered immense emotional distress, yes, he said, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. But these accusations are baseless. There is no substantial evidence of any affair or wrongdoing by my client. When it was our turn, Sophia stood, her presence commanding the room. Your Honor, she began, her voice strong and steady, not only do we have substantial evidence, but we also have testimony to back every claim my client has made. First, Sophia presented the photos, clear, undeniable proof of the affair. The images were passed to the judge, then to the opposing counsel, whose confidence visibly wavered as they looked at them. Next, Sophia played the hotel video. The room fell silent as it showed me entering, followed later by Jack and his mistress laughing and hugging as they left, without a single look of concern. But that's not all, Sophia continued. She called the maid who found me in the hotel room to the stand. The maid's testimony was simple but powerful. I found her on the floor, unconscious. She was in pain and needed medical attention. It was clear she had been abandoned, the maid said, her voice steady but emotional. Each word felt like a nail in the coffin of Jack's defense. I found her unconscious on the floor. They were gone. She could have died, the maid said firmly. Jack's face turned pale, and his mistress fidgeted, her leg bouncing nervously under the table. When it was their turn to respond, Jack stood, his voice unsteady. This isn't what it looks like. We were just scared and confused. Sophia wasted no time. Scared? So you left your pregnant wife unconscious on the floor. She shot back, her tone cold as ice. The judge listened carefully to everything, the evidence, the testimonies, the arguments. After what felt like forever, he finally spoke. I find in favor of the plaintiff, Emily Bryan, he said firmly. The evidence of infidelity and negligence is overwhelming. I am ordering a 80/20th division of all marital assets in favor of the plaintiff, as well as financial compensation for the emotional distress caused by the defendants. Relief washed over me as the weight of his words sank in. As we left the courtroom, Sophia nudged me lightly with her elbow, a satisfied smile on her face. How's that for justice? I managed a small smile, feeling both relief and sadness. Thanks, Sophia. I couldn't have done this without you. Life slowly began to return to normal after the trial, though the pain lingered. Each day was a small step toward healing. With Sophia's encouragement and my own resolve, I started piecing my life back together. I found a small apartment and started fresh. Every piece of furniture I bought, every photo I hung on the walls, felt like a step away from the past. But one thing I couldn't escape was seeing Jack and his mistress at work. It was a constant reminder of the betrayal. One afternoon, as I sorted through legal briefs, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in a while. It was Jack's mother, Mrs. Joyce. "Emily, could we meet?" "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice shaky. I hesitated, memories of her harsh words flashing through my mind. "Why should I meet you, Mrs. Joyce?" "It's about Jack and the company." "Please, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." Her tone caught my attention, and curiosity got the better of me. Despite everything, the company was something I cared deeply about. I reluctantly agreed. We met at a quiet cafe, far from prying eyes. Mrs. Joyce looked worn out, her eyes red and tired, as if she had been crying. "Jack, he's not the boy I raised anymore," she started, avoiding my gaze. "He and that woman, they're planning to cheat the company, sell off assets, and force me out of my home." Her words hung heavily in the air, and I stared at her in disbelief. Before I could speak, she reached across the table, grabbing my hand tightly. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "You're the only one I can trust to stop this." Her plea felt genuine, but my reluctance was strong. "Mrs. Joyce, your family drama is no longer my concern," I said, pulling my hand away. "This isn't just family, Helen. It's the company. Your company, too. They're planning something big, and it could ruin everything," she said, her urgency cutting through my resistance. Her words struck a nerve. Could I turn my back on the company I had worked so hard for? I was still part of that company. It had taken a chance on me when I was fresh out of college, and many of my colleagues felt like family. "All right, I'll look into it," I finally agreed, more for the company's sake than for Mrs. Joyce. Back at work, I quietly reviewed records and contracts, following the trail of transactions tied to Jack and his mistress. It didn't take long to find the problem. The numbers didn't add up. Goods were being purchased at prices far above market value. With the evidence in hand, I headed to the director's office and laid the documents on his desk. He scanned them, his expression growing serious. "This is bad," he said, his tone flat. "Thank you, Emily. You may have just saved the company from a huge loss." I left his office feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction. As I passed Jack and his mistress in the hallway, their laughter grated on my nerves, but I knew I had done the right thing. My fresh start wasn't just about leaving the past behind. It was about standing up for what was right. The company acted quickly. Jack and his mistress were investigated, and the fraudulent activities were stopped. Their scheme had been on the verge of causing significant financial damage, but the company was saved in time. It wasn't about revenge for me, it was about protecting the workplace and the people who had supported me. In my new apartment, I continued to rebuild my life. Each new day brought a little more peace. The pain of betrayal and loss was still there, but it no longer controlled me. I was creating a new chapter, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Justice has a way of finding its path, no matter how complicated the road. After exposing Jack and his mistress, the company launched a full investigation. I was often called to testify, explaining the irregularities I had uncovered. The courtroom became familiar again, but this time I stood tall, confident in the truth and the overwhelming evidence. The legal battle was intense. Jack and his mistress faced the consequences of their actions head-on. The company pursued them relentlessly, filing a massive lawsuit for the potential losses they had caused. The verdict was clear: guilty. The court's decision barred them from ever holding senior positions again, a fitting end for their betrayal. Amid the chaos, my career took an unexpected but welcome turn. The company recognized my efforts and promoted me to a senior legal position, along with a generous raise. It felt like validation, not just for the work I had done, but for my determination to move forward. One quiet afternoon, as I sat in my new office, I reflected on how far I had come. The betrayal, the heartbreak, and the loss were all still part of my story, but they no longer defined me. I smiled to myself, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. I was organizing files in my new office, a bright space with a view of the city skyline, when my phone rang. The number on the screen was one I hadn't seen in a long time. It was Mrs. Joyce. "Helen, it's me," she said, her voice softer and more humble than I remembered. "I wanted to thank you for saving my home from being sold out from under me." Her gratitude sounded sincere, and despite everything, I felt a small pang of sympathy. "You're welcome. I just did what I thought was right," I replied. There was a pause, a moment of quiet before she added, "I was wrong about you, Helen. So very wrong. I used to think you didn't deserve my son, but I've come to realize it was he who didn't deserve you." Her words caught me off guard. They were honest and raw in a way I hadn't expected. "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you might know," I said, my voice steady, but filled with emotion. "Could we meet?" she asked, her tone hopeful. "I'd like to apologize properly, face to face." I thought for a moment before answering. "All right, Mrs. Joyce. Let's meet." We chose a quiet cafe, neutral ground for what I knew would be a serious conversation. As I sat across from her, I noticed how much she had changed. The prideful air she once carried was gone, replaced by a subdued and reflective demeanor. "Helen, I'm sorry for everything," she began, her voice trembling. I was blinded by my own expectations, my own hopes for Jack. I nodded, letting her continue. "I know it wasn't easy for you, and I made it harder. But now I see you were doing what was right, not just for yourself, but for everyone involved." Her honesty took me by surprise, disarming the defenses I hadn't realized I was still holding. "Thank you for apologizing," I said. "It's taken a lot to get here, but I truly appreciate it." We talked for a while, sharing thoughts and feelings we had both buried for too long. By the end of our conversation, there was a sense of closure. While the past couldn't be undone, we found a mutual understanding and respect that had been missing before. As I left the cafe, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Life had thrown many challenges my way, but I had faced them all and come out stronger. The future, once so uncertain, now seemed brighter and full of possibilities. Thank you so much for reading and being part of this journey. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories like this one. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support means the world to me.